Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Denis McClean here from the Geneva Literary Aid Society. Welcome to the GLAS Hour. Just some housekeeping before we get into it. Thank you to all of you who've been making donations to the Edith Wilkins Foundation for Street Children. They're greatly appreciated. As you know, the kids in Darjeeling are under lockdown. There's about 60 of them in residence there. And the staff are now starting an outreach program to the families of 200 children who can no longer access drop-in facilities there. And of course, they're struggling to make ends meet at the moment because a lot of their usual sources of funding are no longer available. So these events are free, but we do ask anybody who can afford it to make a donation to the Edith Wilkins Foundation for Street Children. You can go directly to their website, or you can go to the GLAS website, theglass with 1s.org, and you will find details of their bank account there. So much appreciated if you can provide some support to them. So into it now. For this evening, we have we're very excited to have Kevin Barry with us. About 10 years ago, I attended an event for the Stowe Writers Week. I was actually there to support a novelist whom I knew. She was sharing a stage with a guy I'd never heard of before by the name of Kevin Barry. Unfortunately, she had met him in the lift as she was on her way down to the event, and she was somewhat thrown by his attitude, which seemed to indicate that he had every intention of blowing her off the stage, something which he duly did. He ripped into a darkly hilarious story called Breakfast Wine, one of my favorites from his first collection, There Are Little Kingdoms. I was hooked, and so I think was anyone else who heard him that day. He went on to produce the amazing City of Bohan, perhaps the greatest Irish novel since Dermot Healy's A Goat Song, and it picked up the International Impact Dublin Literary Award, the richest prize in literature. What a start to a sterling career. Then came another great collection of short stories, Paradise the Island, which has inspired a film recently, followed by the imaginative leap that is Beetlebone, which brings us into John Lennon's head as he pays a fictional visit to his island, Clew Bay. That won the Goldsmiths Prize for breaking the mold of fiction. And yesterday, news came from Stowe that his latest novel, Night Boat to Tangier, is on the very short list for the Irish Novel of the Year. I've read them all and I'm a huge fan, and I hope at the end of this hour many more of you will join me. Welcome to GLAS, Kevin.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks for the introduction. Was that Christine Dwyer-Hickey you were talking about?
I didn't want to mention her name.
I love Christine. I was displaying no attitude in the lift at all. I'm here to tell you now.
No, but I mean, the poor girl, you know, she had to read from a rather, what's the word, some pedestrian prose by comparison to what you treated us to before she got on the stage. So my heart went out to her, and she mentioned it. She took it in good humor, you know, but she realized she was on a hiding to nothing. Do you remember? You have a good memory of that, yeah?
She's a great crack. It must be about 2008 or 9, I'd say, Dennis, something like that. It must be a good 11,
it was 2008, I think.
Yeah, it's a while back.
Was that the first time you did Stowe?
It might have been, yeah, I think it might have been. Or actually, I think the year before I did a little Amnesty International event there for Colm O'Gorman. But it was, yeah, it's disappointing we can't get down there this year, you know, with their novel of the year and all that. And it's always great crack, as you know.
I try and go every year. Last week we had Colm Tobin on. Yeah. As you know, Colm is the president of the Stowe Writers Week.
He is, of course, yeah.
He says it's such a shame they put so much work into it this year. It's the 50th anniversary. Oh, he promises that next year is going to be absolutely brilliant. You have to make sure you get on that program, Kevin.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's tough, you know. It's the time of the year when all the festivals are kind of kicking off and kicking in, and you're a little bit lonesome for the. You know, it's a bit kind of corny to say it in some ways, but there is a really good kind of book and reader kind of community in Ireland still. You know, people show up at the events and it gets very good. Everything gets very good crowds compared to a lot of other countries, and it's sad to miss it this year. Yeah,
it was very special, very special. I mean, for you, it must be a bit of a social outlet when you're locked away for so much of the time working on whatever it is you're
Oh,
working.
it is, yeah. For myself and Olivia, my wife. I mean, the festivals and the readings are our social life essentially. You know, the rest of the time we're up here in the hills in County Sligo, and it's a quiet life really. So it's we're kind of left to our own devices this year.
How is the lockdown affecting you, or is it affecting you?
It's kind of not at all in some ways because I mean we live rurally, quite remote place. So the day-to-day texture isn't in any way different. I'm going to the Super Value in Boyle less often than usual, you know. But day to day, it's fine. I mean, it's definitely we're all a bit rattled. We're all a little bit distracted. We're all keeping one eye on the news, and it's that strange kind of rhythm everyone in Ireland has fallen into where you're kind of waiting for Tony Holohan to come on every day at 5:30 for the figures, and he's almost like the Angelus at this stage, you know, when he comes on. But it's
Do not ask for him to belt those.
I know, yeah, but it's we'll get through it. I mean, it's fine. It's a lucky thing to be a writer, really, when something like this is going on, because I work from the house anyway. You know, I work from home, so I'm able to plow on with things.
That's a good introduction to the first question we've received for you, Kevin.
Mm.
It comes from Peter and Karen Leiden, I think the pronunciation is. Hi, Kevin. Hope you and Olivia are safe and well. My question is, have you managed to write any words about the lockdown? If you have, can we hear a little excerpt, please? Best wishes, Peter and Karen Leiden, who you bought the barracks from over
I
over
thought that
13
was.
years ago.
I did. This is like this is your life. Yeah, that's right. Hello to the Leidens. How are you getting on? You know what? It's I think it takes a while for stuff that's as kind of traumatic and dramatic as this to come into your writing in any real way. You often think about something like the Second World War, and the great fiction relating to the Second World War came out in the 1960s. Things like Slaughterhouse-Five, and Catch 22. It takes a long while before such dramatic events kind of percolate in a writer's subconscious and before it comes out on the page. I mean, I've made some little comments here and there in newspaper articles and stuff about how we're getting through, you know, and all of that. It has struck me, you know, that you know, when everything goes so quiet, you hear the birds and you hear the river going past and all that, but what you really hear is yourself, you know, and this can be very disconcerting when, you know, we all have this kind of scaffolding in our day-to-day lives concerned with jobs and work and schedules and our email inbox and our ambition and paying bills and all of that, and it fills so much of our consciousness, you know. And when all of that is suddenly removed, you're kind of dealing with yourself in the raw, you know. You're left with the raw material, and it can be kind of it's interesting, you know, to see yourself when you're kind of stripped down like that.
Right, Kevin. Well, I started off by praising your short stories. I wonder, could you read something for us now?
I will. I'll just read. I have a new book of stories coming in October, late October, and I'll read.
Have you got a title for it?
It's called That Old Country Music.
Very good.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's actually unbelievably, to me, it's 8 years since the last book of stories since Dark Lies the Island. So I had a good route around the desk, and I found about 18 or 19 stories I've written since, and there was kind of 11 of them that seemed to me to really kind of talk to each other and to kind of start to fall together as a suite almost, you know. It's I guess it's a bit like putting an album together for a musician or a band. You're looking for kind of a, you know, different stories but with sort of uniform concerns maybe. And a lot of the stories now are set up around here in the Northwest, around Sligo, Leitrim, naturally. So I'll read a few pages from the opening story in that book that's coming in October. It's a story called The Coast of Leitrim.
Great.
Living alone in his dead uncle's cottage, and with the burden lately of wandering thoughts in the night, Seamus Ferris had fallen hard for a Polish girl who worked at a cafe down in Carrick. He had himself almost convinced that the situation had the dimensions of a love affair, though in fact he'd exchanged no more than a few dozen words with her. whenever she named a price for his flat white and scone, and he shyly paid it, offering a line or two himself on the busyness of the town or the fineness of the weather. "It's like France," he said to her one sunny morning in June. And it was true. The fields of the mountain had all the week idled in what seemed a continental languor, and the lower hills east were a Provençal blue in the haze, and the lake, when he lowered himself into it, was so warm by the evening it didn't even make his midge bites sting. "The heat," he tried again, "makes the place seem like France. We wouldn't be used to it. Passing out from it. Ambulance on standby." His words blurted at the burn of her brown-eyed stare. She didn't lose the run of herself by way of a response, but she said, "Yes, it is very hot," and he believed that something at least cousinly to a smile softened her mouth and moved across her eyes. He had already learned by listening in the cafe that her name was Catherine, which was not what you'd expect for a Polish woman, but lovely. At 35 years of age, Seamus Ferris was by no means setting the night on fire at the damp old Pebble Dash cottage on Dromord Hill. But he had no mortgage nor rent to pay. There was money from when the father died, a bit more again from when the mother went. Also a redundancy payment from Reltec and some dole. He had neither sister nor brother, and he was a little stunned at this relatively young age to find himself on a solo run through life. He had pulled back from his friends too, which wasn't much of a job. He had never had close ones. He'd worked for 8 years at Reltec, but more and more found the banter of the other men there a trial. Their endless football talk, their foolishness and bragging about drink and women. In truth, he was relieved when the chance of a redundancy came up. He had the misfortune in life to be fastidious and to own a delicacy of feeling. He drank wine rather than beer and favoured French films. Such an oddity this made him in the district, he might as well have had 3 fucking heads up on Dromard Hill. He believed Catherine too had sensitivity. She had a dreamy, distracted air, and there was no question but she seemed at a remove from the other mullockers who worked in the cafe. The way she made the short walk home in the evenings to the apartments across the river in Cortober again named a sensitivity. She always slowed a little to look out and over the water, maybe to see what the weather was doing. Perhaps she even read the river light as Seamus did, fastidiously. He could keep track of her route home if he parked down by the boathouse. See the slender woman with brown hair, slow and turn to look over the water, and it was only with a weight of reluctance she moved on again for home. In the sleepless nights of the early summer, his mind ran dangerously across her contours. He played out many scenarios that might occur in the cafe or around town or maybe on a Sunday walk through the fields by the lake. It was more than a slightly different version of himself that acted his part in these happy scenes. Seamus as a confident, blithe man, but also warm and generous and possessed of a bedroom manner suave enough to ensure that the previously reticent Polish girl concluded his reveries roaring the head off herself in gales of sexual transport. Each morning when he awoke, once more in an aroused state, there was no mercy. It was of Catherine from the cafe that he thought. She was pretty, but by no means a supermodel. Not like some of the Eastern Europeans with their cheekbones like blades. And as Seamus was not himself hideous, he felt he might have a chance in a forgiving light. All he had to do was string out the few words right in his mouth. He was in the cafe now 4 and 5 times a week. She was almost always on. The once or twice she hadn't been on were occasions of crushing disappointment, and he glared hard at the mullockers as they bickered and barked like seals over the trays of buns and cakes. Even the hissing spout of the coffee machine was an intense annoyance when Catherine wasn't there. Along with its delicacy, Seamus's mind had also a criminal tendency. This is often the way. A kind of native sneakiness, though he would have been surprised to have been told this. The cafe's toilet was located right by the kitchen, and Seamus could not but notice what looked like a rota pinned to the back of the kitchen door. Catching his breath one Monday morning, he reached in with his phone and took a photograph, and in this way, he had her hours for the week got, also her full name. Katrin Zielinski, she was called, and he wasn't back in the van before he had it Googled. And thus the story begins. It's a strange. I think I wrote it. I wrote that story 2 summers ago in June of 18, when we had the absolutely unprecedented event of 5 weeks of constant sunshine in County Sligo. Yeah, that amazing kind of May, June. And myself and Olivia were getting up every morning and kind of opening the curtains and looking out, and we were going, Jesus, it's like France, you know? We've never seen it like this before. And it's, strangely enough, I found myself, of all things, writing a love story. The sun had affected my brain to the extent that I caught myself writing a love story.
I have to say, Kevin, when I was reading that on the New Yorker website, I had a terrible feeling that it wasn't going to be a love story. An awful sense of dread for poor Seamus and Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, as it goes on, the story, he kind of, I might cut to the ending of it in a second, actually, Dennis, and bring it out. As it goes on, the story, he becomes absolutely flabbergasted when she accepts his offer to go for a date, and things work out well enough. They're both quite fastidious, sniffy kind of characters who like foreign films and who like to finer things in life. And very quickly she moves up into the uncle's cottage in Dromord Hill. But one of the things the story is about is that awful male jealousy, and it kicks in with him very quickly. He's convinced that she's not telling him everything of her past, of her previous loves and life. And by the end of the summer, he's becoming quite a rank paranoid state about all this. He tapes her with his phone at night when she says things in her sleep in Polish. He's trying to work out what's going on. Quickly enough, she kind of has her fill of it, and she moves back into Carrick-on-Shannon. And we think that's pretty much the end of it. So I'll just take us out actually at the end of the story and see where it turns. And there is definitely a sense of dread, I think, building up as we go on through the story, and we try and figure out what Seamus might be capable of when love hasn't worked out to its smooth course. The summer gave way without complaint. The light was thickening over the river now before 8. The long draw was well advanced. On Dromord Hill, the colours of heartbreak came true. She had left him at the end of August. She moved back to the same apartment complex on the Cortober side. For almost the whole month of September, Shamey Ferris slept like the dead. He'd be up out of the bed for no more than an hour at a time, often much less. He had refused happiness when it was presented to him in the haughty form he had always craved. What kind of a fucking fool was he? He drank milk from the carton by the light of the fridge in the middle of the night. Never before in his life had he drunk from the lip of the carton. His skin itched. He had a whistling pain out the left lung. He believed that he might die. The two of them together could have made a small, aloof republic on Dromord Hill. They could have written the rules for it. October. November. He hardly saw the town. He shopped at the Lidl on the Cortober side when he knew she'd be at work. On a dank winter morning, he was trying to retrieve his coin from the trolley when a mulliker from the cafe came by, her face softening at the sorrowful sight of him. "Did you hear it all?" she said, twisting the knife. "Did you hear Catherine went back?" But now, out of the winter grey sky, a soft magic again descended, and he knew the extent of his feeling was beyond the ordinary realm. He came to believe again that they were in telepathic contact with each other. Distance was no object to it. He sent mental messages down Dromord Hill and across the Midland Plain and across all the seas and the cities until at last the city of Stelova Vola presented itself. The message he received back was that he must come to her, and quickly. He flew on a Ryanair to Wrocław and took a bus, a train, then another bus until he found a place. It was a new-looking Polish city with vast white fields opening everywhere in the distance. He walked the freezing afternoon away. He had no idea how to find her. He had to trust that he would be steered. He might well be mad, he reasoned, but what of it? He must find her. An icy rain came across his face as he walked on. In an empty bar, in what appeared to be the centre of the city, he drank a glass of red wine and tapped into his phone the Wi-Fi code. He went to the first place he always went, her Instagram account. It was 14 minutes since she had at last posted a 7th image. It showed a detail of Dromard Hill, a whitethorn bank, in an evening sun flare. Her accompanying caption read, "Mam misli lato." Google Translate, "I am thinking of summer." Beneath her profile, on the post, was the place from which it had been sent, Café Computerie. He showed this name to the barman and was directed to it. It was 2 lefts and a right, a 5-minute walk. It must have been the last internet cafe in Europe. Its dim lights were cinema against the falling dark. Catherine, paler, still lovely, was at a terminal. All the others were unoccupied. She turned at once at the scraping of the door as he entered. "Oh, thanks be to fuck," she said. That's how it ends. If anyone wants the whole lot, it's up on the New Yorker website. Actually, the audio version is on the New Yorker website of that story.
That's a great story. Why did you call it the Coast of Leitrim?
It comes
It's
up.
not being well known for its sea line.
Do you know it's weird? I store up titles for stories and things. I come across a snatch of a phrase or a little something, and I store it up. And I think I was reading the Irish Times property supplement one Thursday morning, as you do, and I just saw a little headline saying "Cottage for sale on coast of Leitrim," and I thought, "She's the coast of Leitrim." And I thought that's a title, that's a story title. I'm going to use that. I just have to come up with the story for it, and I have loads of them on the notes app on my iPhone. I have loads of these titles just waiting for the stories to present themselves. You know, it's weird. Titles either tend to come very quickly and very easily, or very slowly and with difficulty. You know, and it's a sign of a good one when it comes quick. Often.
Is that a story of the Celtic Tiger?
It kind of is. Yeah, it's kind of around that time. It's definitely set over the kind of, I would say, over the last kind of 8-9 years or something like that, maybe around the time of the downturn. It's strange, the kind of, and I talked about this a little already in terms of the current pandemic, but the events of the world and your life and your surrounding, there can be a little bit of a lag before it goes into your fiction, you know. Fiction kind of prepares itself quite slowly in the back of your mind, in your subconscious, and it takes a while for the world to come in. But yeah, it's interesting to me now. I moved up here. I bought the house off the Leydens up here 13 years ago, when myself and Olivia had moved back from the UK.
Can you tell us a little bit about the house and or how it might have influenced your writing?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's built in the 1840s as a barracks for the Royal Irish Constabulary. So it's an old RIC barracks. I was just this week actually Googling a little about it, and I knew that the roof had been burned off by the IRA sometime in the War of Independence kind of years, and I found out that it's almost 100 years exactly to the day since they came down and they burnt the roof off one Sunday night. But it was one of those very kind of courteous operations of the era, because they gave the barracks occupants a week's notice that they were going to burn the roof off so that there would be no one inside at the time.
And the library survived behind you.
The library is still going, yeah. So it was kind of, the guards came in then in 1926 or whatever it was, and it was a Garda station up until, I think up until the late 70s. We're here the last 13 years. There are still bars on the windows downstairs. You'd spot them. An RIC barracks, they're a particular type of building, and you'd spot them all over the country, you know. Of course, John McGahern grew up in a RIC barracks across in Mohill or Coote Hall. Was it one of those ones in Leitrim? It was Mohill, yeah. Very similar building to this. there's a stove that I have out in my shed out the back now that was put in when the Free State Guards came in. It's a Searchlight #4 stove that was issued, I think, to every new Garda station in the country, and it's still warming me, you know. There are no ghosts, tragically. I was sure there would be the ghost of a tortured Fenian or something here and there, but divil the sign of one, you know.
Seems to have been a very fertile ground for you in terms of your writing.
That's you couldn't get better in some ways. It's a quiet place, and there are no distractions. There's not much else to do. It kind of, you know, it's pragmatically living in a kind of rural area means that I don't have to do another job. I don't have to teach or anything like that. I just get on with the writing. I'm not paying a big city mortgage as I would be if I was living in Dublin or in London or whatever. So that's a great.
Is this the longest you've lived in any one place? I know you've moved around quite a bit.
Yeah, it is since I was a kid anyway. Yeah, since I was a child, it is. Moved around an awful lot in my 20s in Cork City, and then we were over with Olivia. I was in Edinburgh for a few years, in Liverpool, back and forth to the States quite a bit, and around Spain quite a lot over the years. But yeah, it's nice. I mean, we tend to kind of try and escape a bit in kind of January, February time when it's kind of very dark and very damp and kind of very, very, very unforgiving here in terms of natural daylight and stuff. So it's nice when you can get out for a couple of months in the winter. But it's a great place. There are quite a few writers in Sligo and Leitrim and Roscommon. You know, the best writing advice I ever heard was from the great American essayist Annie Dillard, who said, "Just keep your overheads low. That's all you need to know as a writer." It's very unpredictable. You know, you have very good years and you can have, you know, slowish years, so you never know what's going to come in the door in terms of money. So it's to have a low overhead is the ideal situation, really.
Right. We have a question here on short story front. It's from Neptune Ingerson. He asks, how did you manage to enter the New Yorker fortress for the first time? And did you have many rejections before getting your first story published there?
I had, I think, 2 rejections before they took one. I've published 4 or 5 stories with them now. I think my first one was in 2010. Fjord of Killary story made it in. They had seen a couple of stories before then, and I got kind of very, very kind of warm rejections, which is what you look out for, you know. I got rejections back saying we'd be very interested in reading more. And like at that stage, I'd only had the 1 slim volume of stories published, so I hadn't built up a name or anything at all by that stage. But it was, it's a big deal to get one in there because, you know, it's over 1 million copies of that on the newsstand, and then a huge online readership. So it makes it has made a big difference to me in the US in terms of publishing over there to get a bit of name recognition going. It means a lot because I've read New Yorker stories as a reader since the 90s. You know, I've always read the story every week in the New Yorker. And in that kind of bitter way, as a young fella in my early 20s going, I can fucking do better than that. Come on, you know. But yeah, no, it's great. I hope to continue contributing to them. It's a phenomenally well-resourced magazine. So you get a lot of really kind of lavish editorial care. You know, a couple of editors go through the story, and then all the fact checkers come in, and that can be quite amusing when they're querying kind of road directions in County Mayo and stuff in your stories from their Manhattan base, you know. I think in that first story, Fjord of Killary, I described driving from I think it was from Westport to Newport in 40 minutes or something. And I got the fact checker back from the New Yorker saying, "Mr. Barry, we're looking at this and it doesn't look like you could do it in 40 minutes, you know." And I was saying, you should see the way we fucking drive out here. You could absolutely do it in 40 minutes. But yeah, no, it's a good venue, you know, for short stories.
Oh, great, Kevin. Coming on to the city of Bohan, which I also heard you read at Listowel. Listowel is probably it is the only festival that I go to regularly. And I remember that vividly because I hadn't read the book myself at that stage. and I think you read the opening page or so of it, and it
Yeah,
made a great impression on again on the crowd. I think we were in the old plaza in Listowel.
that's right. Yeah.
Was City of Bohan? I mean, where is that coming from? Is it from your travels abroad, or is it Limerick, or
It's
you know?
strange, people ask me because of the language in the book. People tend to ask me, is it Limerick or Cork? I grew up in Limerick and I spent a lot of my 20s in Cork, and I always say it's kind of a mixture of the two in my mind. So it's kind of Buttevant or Charleville. It's good halfway between. It's the story of City of Bohan. It's a kind of a deranged future Irish city, sometime in the 2050s, with lots of gang feuds and wars going on. There's no technology very much that we can see, so we don't know what's happened. But I think I was about halfway through the book when I realised this isn't really about a future place at all. This is really about growing up in Limerick and Cork in the 80s and 90s, and just trying to bring some of the language that I grew up with onto the page. And it was a kind of a great discovery to me that language, which is of working class people in Limerick and in Cork City, has never really made it very much into the pages of Irish literature, because people in those communities weren't writing literary fiction very much. Maybe a little bit more in Irish theatre it would have come in, but less so in books. So it was kind of, when I was writing this in a kind of a mongrel Limerick Cork/Cork accent, it struck me that this is actually a great resource to do this kind of gang story Western. It gives it a very different flavor if I do it in that accent, Will I read that opening page or so?
And did you create some of the slang yourself?
And there's a few made up bits, but there's always, I think, even with the made up bits, there's some kind of logic, hopefully, behind it that you could kind of work out. A lot would come from kind of from traveller cant, from traveller language, from pure kind of Cork and Limerick slang, and bits from Irish, of course, as well. Will tend to come in. But yeah,
We'd love to hear the.
I'll give a page or two. It's strange. I haven't read from it in quite a while, so I'll have to see if I can still do a Bohan accent.
Okay.
Chapter 1: The nature of the disturbance. Whatever is wrong with us is coming in off that river. No argument. The taint of badness on the city's air is a taint off that river. This is the Bohan River we're talking about, a blackwater surge, malevolent. It roars in off the big nothing waste, and the city was spawned by it and was named for it. City of Bohan. He walked the docks and breathed in the sweet badness of the river. It was past midnight on the Bohan front. There was an evenness to his footfall, a slow, calm rhythm of leather on stone, and the dockside lamps burned in the nighttime, a green haze, the light of a sad dream. The water's roar for Hartnett was as the rushing of his own blood. And as he passed the merchant yards, the guard dogs strung out a sequence of howls all along the front. See the dogs, their hackles heaped, their yellow eyes livid. We could tell he was coming by the howling of the dogs. Polis watched him from a distance. For a hoss Polis watering their pieballs at a trough cross in Smoketown. Polis were fresh from the sight of a reefing. "You're lamping him over," said one. "Albino, motherfucker." "Set your clock by him," said the other. Albino, some called him. Others knew him as the long fella. He ran the Hartnett fancy. Cut off from the dockside and walked on into the back trace, the infamous Bohan trace, a most evil labyrinth, an unknowable web of streets. He had that back trace look to him. A dapper buck in a natty boy Crombie, the Crombie draped all casual-like over the shoulders of a pale grey Italian suit, mohair. Mouth a teeth at him like a vandalised graveyard, but we all have our crosses. There was a pair of hand-stitched Portuguese boots that slapped his footfall, and the stress that fell, the emphasis was money. Hard got the riches. Oh, the stories we told out in Bohan about Logan Hartnett. Dank little squares of the trace opened out suddenly, like gasps, and Logan passed through. All sorts of queer hawks lingered, draped deep in the small hours. They looked down, as he passed by. They examined their toes and their sacks of tawny wine. You wouldn't make eye contact with the long fella if you could help it. Strange, but we had a fear of him and a pride in him both. He had a fine hold of himself, as we say in Bohan. He was graceful and erect, and he looked neither left nor right, but straight out ahead always, with the shoulders thrown back like a general. He walked the Arab tangle of alleyways and wines that make up the Bohan trace, and there was the slap, the lift, the slap, the lift of Portuguese leather on the back street stones. Yes, and Logan was in his element as he made progress through the labyrinth. He feared not the shadows. He knew the fibres of the place. He knew every last twist and lilt of it. It's strange actually to read from your old work from a while back. It's kind of like it's kind of like visiting a ghost of yourself. So I wrote that page, I guess, in 2008 or 9. It came out in 2011. So it's kind of, it's funny, you can kind of recognize it very much as yourself, but it feels like another writer as well. Almost, it's odd, you know. The way it's funny. Like people ask as a writer about your style on the page, your prose style. And there's really nothing mysterious about it. It's just a very direct projection of your personality. You know, it all comes out on the page, and there's not that much you can do about your personality. You just have to go with it in your fiction. But you know, we're changing all the time as people as we get older. And it shows up in your prose as you change. So when I go back to read from something like that now, City of Bohan, I go, Jesus, this is a younger fella right here, you know. But it's nice. It's nice to visit yourself as well.
It's a bit of a classic at this stage, I would say. No, I mean,
yeah,
did you have any fear yourself when you saw the success that greeted it? Were you afraid that Jesus, how am I going to top this?
No. I wouldn't think that. I mean, I don't think anything I write is perfect. You know what I mean? I wouldn't put them out if I didn't think there was plenty in them for the reader. But I am very fond of some of the characters in City of Bohan. I remember when I was recording the audiobook, and I do the audiobooks myself. And you learn an awful lot about your book when you read it out loud, start to finish. You know, you see the weak spots and you see the strong spots. My big problem when I read the audiobook, start to finish of Bohan, was my favorite characters weren't in it enough. I think the two best characters in it are actually the women, are Gurley Hartnett, Logan's mother, who's an old wagon of 80 in the bed, who's kind of still running the city, and also the kind of homicidal teenage killer Jenny Ching. Those two are by far my favorites, and they're kind of in cahoots. And if I ever go back to it for future work, I think I'll be thinking a lot about those two, you know. But it's
was it inspired in any way by your experiences as a young reporter in Limerick?
Oh, very much so, yeah. And it's I remember actually very vividly. I was a kind of a cub reporter from 1988 was my first job. I dropped out of NIHE Limerick, as it then was, after about a couple of weeks of first year university, because I was offered a job on a new newspaper, the Limerick Tribune. And I was doing the courts and the council meetings and all that, and it's a great way to get to know a small city, you know. And I got quite great with the late Jim Kemmy, who was a fantastic guy. He was the Democratic Left was his party, I think. He was kind of independent socialist. And he was a great guy. He was a local historian as well. And it was a very troubled time in Limerick. There were a lot of sort of gang feuds and stuff going on. There was a lot of violence, a lot of knife violence. And I was down by the river one day and I met Jim, and we were kind of chatting and we were kind of looking out over the water, and we were talking about some of the recent trouble in town. And I said, Jesus, Jim, what to be wrong with us at all, you know, around this place? And he said, I don't know, but I think it's coming in off the river. You know? And I kind of saved up the line for years, and kind of used it as the opening line for City of Bohan. But that kind of thing comes into all my work, really, that it's our places that kind of dictate us as people, and that feed through into our voices and into our emotions and into our events.
Yeah, you know, I lived in Jamaica myself for over 3 years.
Wow.
And reading City of Bohan, I mean, I thought it could almost have been Kingston, you know.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely, it's I mean, when I think of the city physically, I kind of see some of the old Limerick around the docks and stuff. But when I hear the accent, I hear it more Corkish, and the Cork accent can sound almost like a patois. You know, it can go into it could almost go Caribbean at times. So definitely there's an element of that coming into it. But it's yeah, it's strange. You have kind of different sort of you have different feelings for all of your books. And I suppose it's like if you have kids, you don't want to have a favorite child, but it's kind of, I don't know, I kind of have the most difficult book for me was Beetlebone. That took a long time because I was trying to get a voice for John Lennon. So in some ways, that's the one I'm kind of most proud of. And it was the most difficult to do, to take an iconic figure and try to make a convincing character of him. But it's one of the nice things and a kind of an unexpected thing about a writing career is that, you know, it's not like I go and read my own stuff over and over again, but it gives you a very vivid memory of where you are in your life when you come across the old stuff, you know, what you were doing and what you were up to. Right. But you're always trying to convince yourself that the thing that's currently on the desk, the work in progress, is the best thing you've ever done, and you have to believe that and keep going with it, you know.
Talking of Beetlebone, there's a question here from Niall Armstrong who's asking, how influenced are you by rock music and reggae? I mean,
massively, absolutely massively. And it's you know, I play music in the shed when I work all the time. Very often talking to Jamaica, I play old dub reggae compilations. They tend not to have very many lyrics on there, so it's kind of not distracting you with words. It just creates a kind of an ambience or an atmosphere in the room. But I think just because of my chronology, my basic chronology, and growing up in the kind of 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s, like in terms of influence on my work, music and television and film are just as important as literary influences, you know. And often I think it's just the foundational stuff is the things that you were into as a teenager, late teens, early 20s, that stuff you kind of, that's the foundational influence on your work as a writer, and it kind of never goes away. So like in my late teens, early 20s, I was very into things like Scorsese films and David Lynch films and Twin Peaks and all the kind of 80s music I would have listened to. And certainly the Beatles I have always been a Beatles man as well. A John Lennon rather than Paul McCartney Beatles man, but there you go.
And at what point, Kevin, did you decide that you wanted to be a writer full time? What was the turning point for you?
Well, all the way through kind of my 20s, after I did my early jobs on newspapers, I was freelancing as a journalist in Cork. I was doing grand, you know. I was writing kind of mainly arts stuff, reviews and interviewing bands and things like that. And I was writing for good papers. I'd a column in the Examiner. I was writing reviews for the Irish Times, writing little bits in the Guardian and stuff. But it was by my kind of late 20s, 27, 28, I knew I wasn't getting happy. You know, I knew there was kind of a part of my creative brain that I wasn't using, the part where fiction comes from. And I knew I kind of had to get serious about that. And I was in my late 20s before I got properly serious about writing fiction. I was always doing little bits earlier on, you know, here and there. At 4 a.m, having sort of crawled home from a nightclub in Cork, I'd put pen to paper, you know, and it would seem like genius at the time, until the sober light of day crept in across Cork Harbour. But late 20s, I got fairly serious about it, and I remember very vividly. One day in August '99, I had a little caravan down in Allihies in West Cork, out in the Beara Peninsula, and I was trying to write a novel, and it was a god-awful attempt. It was a terrible thing. But I went out for a walk on a cliff one day, and I remember saying to myself very earnestly, going, are you serious? You know, are you really going to do this? And I said, yeah, fuck it. I'm definitely going to sort of give it everything that's needed. You know, I knew I had kind of natural ability, and it just needed a great deal of work really to bring it home, and to make my way as a writer. And that was, I think of that date as kind of my writer's birthday. It was August 13th. In 1999, and I kind of tend to mark it, you know, that date as a kind of a birthday for me. It was kind of I got serious about it, and then you'd find a lot of writers are like that. It tends to be kind of late 20s. You tend to have to kind of put quite a bit of often life experience under your belt before you have stuff to write about, you know,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. I'm kind of, my trajectory as a writer is quite old fashioned now. Most writers now do it at university. They do MFAs and they do kind of creative writing workshops and all that. I didn't come out of that era at all. Coming up through the ranks of local newspapers and freelance journalism would have been a very traditional way into book writing in the 20th century and earlier parts, but it's not anymore. So I'm kind of the last cub reporter, you know, on the planet.
A very honourable trade, cub reporter.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm always looking for that great Irish newspaper novel, you know. It's not out there yet.
No, it's not. Well, Joyce took a good stab at it in Ulysses. There's a great chapter in Ulysses set in the Freeman's Journal, I think it was.
What's the great?
Kevin, we have a question in here from a pharmacist in Dunleary who wishes to remain anonymous.
Okay.
He's asking how much did clubbing affect your sensibility and outlook on life?
Clubbing, yeah. I mean, it definitely kind of kept me from the desk quite a bit in my 20s. I'd say I was quite frequently out in the tiles in Cork and stuff in those days. But you know, actually, Cork had a great in the 1990s. There was a great kind of sort of a DIY ethos among the kind of creative classes in Cork. You had people like Cork Adorca Theatre were putting on plays, early plays by writers like Enda Walsh and stuff like that, writers like Conor Creed in town. And people were kind of putting on club nights and putting on gigs and putting on little plays. And it was a good atmosphere. It was a kind of sense of, you know, don't wait around for people to come knocking on your door looking for the work. You know, just make it and start doing it. And it's a great attitude to have. And so out of that kind of creative kind of community that was in Cork at that time, and we didn't go around calling ourselves a creative community, but you know, there was definitely a kind of a get up and do something kind of atmosphere at the time, I would say, and it was very, very useful for me, I think.
More so than today, would you think?
I think so. In some ways, our cities have changed greatly in the kind of ensuing 20 years. Not always for the better, I think. But and of course, we're at a very, very interesting point now, I think, when we all have time to think about cities and what they're for and how we're going to use them, pushing on from the situation we're in. It's a very interesting time. I hope we change, you know, the way we approach city life and consider what they're for, and how we use them. But it's interesting times.
Coming back to Beetlebone, Kevin, is there a passage you'd like to read to us from that?
I very briefly, I'll just give the start of it. Just John Lennon has decided to find his island in Clew Bay that he bought 9 years previously. He can't remember where it is, so he's landed in the middle of the night and he's been driven out to Mayo by a very strange driver. He sets out for the place as an animal might, as though on some fated migration. There's nothing rational about it, nor even entirely sane. This is the great attraction. He's been travelling half the night east and nobody has seen him. If you keep your eyes down, they can't see you. Across the strung out skies and through the eerie airports, and now he sits in the back of the old Mercedes. His brain feels like a city centre and there's a strange tingling in the bones of his monkey feet. Fuck it, he will deal with it. The road unfurls as a black tongue and laps at the night. There's something monkeyish, isn't there, about his feet? Also, his gums are bleeding. He won't worry about that now. He'll save it till later. Trees and fields pass by in the grainy night. Monkeys on the fucking brain lately, as a matter of fact. Anxiety. He hears a blue yonderly note from somewhere. Perhaps it's from within. Now the driver's sombre eyes show up in the rear view. It's arranged, he says. There should be no bother whatsoever, but we're talking an hour yet to the hotel out there. Driver is a very smooth timbre, deep and trustworthy, like a newscaster. The bass note and brown velvet of his voice are the corduroy of it, and the great chunky old Merc cuts the air quiet as money as they move. John is tired, but not for sleeping. No fucking pressmen, he says, and no fucking photogs.
Very good. Having a question here from Kilty Clogher.
Oh my God, yeah.
What advice would you give? What advice would you give border towns to use their creative spirits?
What advice would I give?
Border towns to use their creative spirits. Kilty Clogher is in Leitrim, no?
Oh, it is, of course, yeah. Border towns. Yeah, I'm familiar with the border towns from our frequent trips to Enniskillen to buy the cheaper wine up in the Asda, you know. But it's strange. I was talking to someone, a writer who comes from a border town, Pat McCabe, who comes from Clonus, of course, in Monaghan. And Pat was talking about the changes in Clonus since he was a kid there. And he said when he was growing up in like the 50s in Clonus as a child, you know, it was cacophonous, you know. There was like hundreds of children running around the streets all the time, and there was loads going on, and there was a great kind of town language and gossip going on. And now he says, you know, it can seem eerily quiet, and I think that's something similar to all our towns around here. The sense that the world has gone indoors a little bit, and there's kind of, it's again, you know, it's something we really need to think about as we push on from now. What are our towns for? I think one of the very positive things that's happening, and it's through pragmatic means really it's happening, is that a lot of writers and artists and musicians and creative people have basically figured, look, we just can't afford to live in the big cities anymore. We've essentially been priced out. And a lot of people are going back to their home places, and they're going to small rural towns. And I think there's a great future in that for rural places and for the smaller towns, if they can be a home to creatives, you know, and to the creative arts.
That's a great answer, Kevin. I'm conscious of the fact that Olivia is waiting for you to make a start on the dinner.
I do all the cooking, so I'd say I'd say about another 5-10 minutes, kind of a thing, Dennis. But yeah, I'll have to go after that.
Because we couldn't finish the evening without talking a bit about a fantastic book, Night Boat to Tangier. I suppose I'm not the first person to comment on the fact that there's a sort of Samuel Beckett vibe from it, you know, two men waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, Morris and Charlie are waiting, and I've discovered, of course, it's the easiest thing in the world to get yourself compared to Beckett. You know, all you have to do is to have two Irish lads waiting for something, and the Beckett comparisons come running in the door.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of it's strange, you know. Morris and Charlie, who are these two Cork City gangsters, were in their kind of early 50s, past their best, really, kind of on the fade. And one of their daughters is missing in southern Spain. But yeah, they were hanging around for a while before I knew what to do with them. And I tried it as a play, but it very quickly taught me that the story needed to open out into their shared past and to figure out who they were. And it's strange, they're awful pair, you know. They're dark and dangerous pair, but somehow they've really resonated with readers, and it's strange. I wasn't sure how they go down, but it's already kind of outsold all the previous books together. It's been
I can't believe that.
Yeah,
even more than Bohan.
Yeah, it's double it already. It got a great stroke of luck, Dennis. It got both the Booker Prize nomination, and it was in the top 10 of the year in the New York Times, which was a huge boost for it. And it just took off, and it's flying down the road. So people sometimes ask me, you know, are you ever worried about writing in a very local accent, in a Cork accent or a Limerick accent? And I was thinking, no, you can't be too local. You can't be local enough. The way to be universal is to write in that kind of as local an accent as you possibly can. But it's nice to see it moving along down the road.
I mean, in one sense, you could look at it as a kind of you reimagining the crime novel. It's a crime novel with a difference, you know. It's a crime novel with intellectual weight and with great style, verve. You know, the dialogue is fantastic. So, was that in the back? I mean, are you influenced by crime fiction?
I'm a huge fan of crime fiction. I read a lot of it. What I was interested in doing with Morris and Charlie was very often, like, you will get these great characters in crime fiction, but they never quite get past the two-dimensional stage. You know, Absolutely. They're just the wisecracks, or they're just the violence, or so forth. And that's the nature of the game with crime fiction. They're made to turn the pages, you know. So I wanted to try and see if I could take two figures like that and get them more in the round, make kind of real people of them. And strangely, it was when the women came into the story, when Morris's late wife, Cynthia, and the missing girl, Dilly, when they showed up, it started to feel more real, you know? I could kind of see the two men in relief once those characters from the kind of shared past and family life came into it more so.
Quite amazing how you make them as one, both sympathetic figures, and at the same time you realize that they're two real mean bastards who.
Yeah, and it's kind of, and they've done lots of really, really dark things. But it's kind of, I guess no matter what I'm writing, whether it's a short story or a novel or script or whatever it is, what I'm always kind of trying to do, Dennis, is trying to subvert the reader's expectation. You know, like if the reader thinks it's going in a particular direction, to unseat her or to unseat him and say, oh no, this isn't that kind of story at all. So I'm playing with tone a lot, and I'm balancing things like violence and comedy. How do you bring those into the same kind of project? So it's kind of, you know, I work a lot with the ear and trying to get the voices right. If you get the voices right, you can kind of get everything else following on from that. You know, if you get the way people talk, you can get their souls, you know, after that. And Irish people, you know, we kind of love to talk, and we love the sounds of our own voices, but we say very little then as well, you know. And it can take a long time to work out the real meaning of an Irish conversation, you know. Take about 14 years.
For Godot, wasn't it?
It can take a while before you get to the bottom of a real Irish conversation. But it's all of my work tends to start from that place, from people talking and not speaking, really, you know.
Would you like to read a passage from?
I will. I'll just again. I've read the openings for the other two, so I'll just give the first kind of page or so from Tangier, which I should almost know by heart at this stage.
I've taken that night boat myself.
Have you? The Tangier. Would you say there's any end in sight, Charlie? I'd say you nearly have an answer to that question already, Morris. Two Irishmen, sombre in the dank light of the terminal, make gestures of long sufferance and woe. They are born to such gestures and offer them easily. It is night in the old Spanish port of Algeciras. Oh, and this is as awful a place as you could muster. You'd want the eyes sideways in your head. The ferry terminal has a haunted air, a sinister feeling. It reeks of tired bodies and dread. There are scraps of frayed posters, the missing. There are customs announcements, the narcotraficante. A blind man roils in night sweat and clicks his teeth to sell lottery tickets like a fat, rattling serpent. He's doing nothing for the place. The Irishmen look out blithely at the faces that pass by. Above them, a cafe bar hisses with expectancy, clinks of life. There is a hatch with a sign marked Information, tell us more, and a small ledge tilts out from it questioningly. Morris Hearn and Charlie Redmond sit on a bench a few yards west of the hatch. They are in their low 50s. The years are rolling out like tide now. There is old weather on their faces, on the hard lines of their jaws, on their chaotic mouths. But they retain just about a rakish air. You want to hop back there, Charlie, have another word, see about this next boat that's due in? Yeah, but the same lad is still on, Morris. The lad with the bitter face on him. He's not a talker, boss. Try him, Charlie. Charlie Redmond rises up from the bench in a bundle of sighs. He unfolds his long bones. He approaches the hatch. He's lame. Drags the right peg in a soft brushing motion with practiced ease. He throws his elbows onto the counter. His aura is of brassy menace. He wears a corner boy's grimace. His Spanish pronunciation is very much from the north side of Cork City. Hola y buenos noches, he says. No response. Morris shakes his head sadly. I fucking hate ignorance, he says. Charlie tries again. Hola, he says, excuse me, trying to find out about this next boat coming in, this boat from Tangier, or going out. A silence, a gesture. Charlie looks back to his friend and mimics the Information Istel's shrug. All I'm getting here is the shoulders, Morris. Facing him like a bad marriage, Morris says.
Great, well done.
Lots of good things.
Kevin, we'll finish up with this one. It's a question from somebody who must live not too far from you, Rory in Boyle. He's asking, how much did you have to do with the filming of Dark Lies the Island around Boyle? And in what forest did Peter Coonan hang out in? I haven't seen the film, so
Peter Coonan's forest. Well, I think I don't know if it was in Lockheed Forest Park somewhere. It might have been. I was around a bit while they were filming. I wrote the script, adapted from stories, so it was kind of great crack to see it come to life. It was very funny. One day I was in Boyle, in the Super Value, in the queue, and there was a funeral scene in the film. So there was a hearse outside in the street with a coffin in the back of it, and there was two ladies of a certain age in front of me in the queue going, "Who's dead? Jesus, who's dead around the place at all?" and it wasn't, but it was. We got some great actors in it. And it was really nice to see people like Pat Short and Peter and Charlie Murphy and Tommy Tiernan does a great turn in it actually, as a fellow taking over a chipper inside in Boyle. So it was fun to see it.
I've seen the trailer. Were you happy with the finished product?
I was. I mean, I'm delighted with the performances, and I think it looks great. Sligo and Leitrim looks great in it. And then actually, the best crack we had with it was we had a showing of it over in the Cineplex in Carrick. So packed house, and so people were like enjoying it for its own thing. But of course, everyone knew every place in the film as well, you know. And they were kind of picking out whose wall was that and what bit of forest that was. But it was great fun, and I'm writing other scripts all the time, so hopefully there'll be more, you know.
Great. So Kevin, just recall for us again this new book of short stories, when we can expect it.
It's out the end of October, and it's called That Old Country Music.
That Old Country Music. Great. Really look forward to that. Kevin, you've been great with your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million, Dennis.
Pleasure. And I urge everyone listening to enjoy the rest of the lockdown with the complete library of Kevin's books. 5 fantastic volumes. Start and read them in chronological order, I recommend. Yeah.
Fair play.
So thanks a million.
It was a pleasure, Dennis. Really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, man.
Enjoy your dinner.
Cheers. Take care.
Good night, everybody. Talk to you next week.